Pacific Rim is a bit of an interesting franchise because we've gone from being inspired from anime and just outright being a tribute to taking more of that shit and going a bit more balls over the walls and then now just becoming anime. It's a bit of a ironic tale in all honesty, and with Pacific Rim the Black Season 2 coming out soon, I might as well give my thoughts on Season 1. So, let's get into the video, folks. So just to make it clear, when it comes to this video, I'm going to be giving my opinions on things such as the general atmosphere and tone, the writing and the characters, and also the action. I'm also going to be trying to compare them to like the first and second movie because the general basis for the fandom when it comes like to judging the general quality of this show or just the general quality of this franchise in general is the first movie where things were pretty good and then the second movie where things kind of just turned out to be pretty bad. So let's continue. So to start off, when it comes to the general tone and atmosphere of the show, I'm not gonna lie, it really feels on par with the first movie, especially in the first episode, because unlike most anime shows where it's like, oh no, humanity lost, but they magically are able to win when they have their backs against the wall, in this show, humanity just outright loses, and a lot of the time whenever it comes to our main characters, whenever they're not dealing with an antagonistic force which is out there trying to kill them, it's just them on their own, just in this wasteland, which is a nice change of pace, because it really shows you about how bad the situation has gotten to the point to where there's no one out there to help these main characters other than themselves when it comes to what they have out there, and I really like that. Not only that, but I feel like the tone of this show is also on par with the first movie, with it not holding back on how quick people die. Like, no, seriously, if you remember the first movie, dying was a bit of a common thing, and also in the show it's a bit of a common thing. So once again, I feel like it's a pretty good change of pace, or pretty good when it comes to kind of following the trend that the first film did. But now, let's move on to the second thing, which is the characters and the general writing. So when it comes to characters in Pacific Rim, there's the first movie which does a pretty good job with them, then there's the second movie which just does a terrible job because there's way too many of them. And then there's Pacific Rim the Black, which has a relatively small cast of characters, that being Taylor, Haley, May, Boy, and Shane, which is pretty good for the most part because that way we don't have too many people to focus on, and we have a certain amount of people to actually, I don't know, expand upon when it comes to our main character. Obviously, the main characters being Taylor, Haley, and May, and also Boy, and then the main antagonist of the series being Shane. Now, Taylor and Haley may not be the best characters of this franchise. They definitely don't fit up to the standards to which Mako and Riley were in the first movie, but at the same time, I wouldn't really call them terrible. And I feel like the thing that makes their story the most interesting has to be the fact that, you know what, unlike other anime to where being in a giant robot basically makes every other thing, like, I don't know, traversing the apocalypse easy, in this show, it only makes it worse, or only makes it a lot more harder, because not only are they basically trying to find out about how this giant robot works in the first season, but outside of that, whenever they're outside of the giant robot, they always have a new series of problems which they have to deal with, like traveling an old city which they haven't been to in years because, well, it's been destroyed by kaiju, it has been overtaken, or dealing with people because there's this guy named Shane which they meet not so long after, which seems nice, but honestly has a couple of things, or has a couple of personal goals which he wants to achieve, like using their Jaeger for some apparent reason, which, you know what, it makes sense. I feel like if I were the apocalypse and I wanted to have power over everyone, I probably would just whip out a Jaeger and go like, yeah, give me what you want, or else I'm just gonna go stomp on your settlement and, I don't know, get what I want after. And you know what, I find him to be pretty interesting as well, not only due to the fact that he's like the only real human antagonist that we had in this series, but he does a couple of things in like the episode where he's interrogating Taylor, to where we've never really seen that before, and I'm not gonna go spoil it. I guess you could go watch it yourself and stuff like that. And then there's May, which is there, I guess, and then there's Boy, which is a bit controversial, mainly due to the fact that he's Grogu, in the sense that he's this innocent little kid which no one suspects of doing anything at all, but at the same time he's basically Eren Yeager, in a sense that he could just turn into a goddamn kaiju. But overall, I find the general story and the characters to be pretty nice to watch because, you know, they may not be the best, but just watching these guys overcome just overcoming all these obstacles which they have to deal with, which are just constantly thrown their way every single time, is pretty fun to watch. But now let's move on to the weakest part about this series, which is the action. So, if there's one thing about Pacific Rim which has always stood out from other, well, sci-fi media, it probably has to be the fact that they're like the only movies that get it to where you could have a giant robot beat the ever-living shit out of a giant monster to have that be the most entertaining thing about it. Rather if you like the story, or rather if you dislike the story. But then there's this series to where, unlike the first two movies to where that's something that's a lot more common, as I said before, Pacific Rim The Black is more based around its characters. So in the beginning, when our characters have no experience and have literally no idea about what the world is like or how to even pilot a Jaeger, they get their asses kicked. And a lot of the time when it comes to them dealing with their Jaeger in general, it's always like a learning experience when it comes to how to fight and how to traverse the apocalypse. While in the very ending of the show, when they actually gain a sense of confidence and coordination, they manage to kill their first Jaeger, which is kind of cool when it comes to showing the character progression. And it's kind of cool to see something like that, unlike any other anime to where our main characters like suck for an episode or two, but then they just kick ass for the rest of it. And yeah, if I were to talk about 3 good action scenes just within the series in general, I'd say the first episode with Hunter Vertigo is pretty good. The 6th episode is pretty good, with Apex kicking Atlas's ass. And then there's the last one with Atlas Destroyer having a new arm and killing its first kaiju, which is pretty good. But now that we're done with that, let's move on to the very ending and talk about the 2nd season, just a little bit. So, when it comes to this series overall, I'd say that it's pretty good. It does a lot of things from the first movie and a little bit from the second movie by taking certain ideas and executing them in a way to where they actually feel bearable in a way, to where it doesn't feel bad, but it's good on its own right when it comes to being its own standalone story. But for the 2nd season, it really seems to be taking things in another direction. While the first season seemed to be playing things pretty safe with there being like one kaiju which it had to deal with, one main bad guy which they had to deal with. In season 2, it just seems like your main characters are just going to be having to go through a damn endurance test when it comes to how many kaiju and how many human threats they have to deal with. Because they aren't just dealing with some army and people with guns, they're dealing with a whole cult of people that basically worship the kaiju, which seems to be pretty cool, especially because the 2nd season seems to be leaning more into that more action and more drama-oriented thing, which is way more recognizable for Pacific Rim. But overall, I'd say, as I said before, that the series is pretty good as a standalone and manages to kind of redeem the franchise after the sequel, which was pretty bad, admittedly so. But that's all I really have to say, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and that is all. See you guys in my other video coming soon, and I am out, folks. Later.